Hello and welcome everyone. Thank you for tuning in to our third Wednesday program. My name is Miranda Chirac from the Rome Historical Society. We offer free monthly programming every month on the third Wednesday, and so we're really pleased for you guys to be here today. Rome Historical Society, we're a nonprofit organization, and I wanted to take this opportunity to give a shout out to our corporate members, Mohawk Valley Community Center, AIS, and Revere Copper. We really appreciate the support of all of our members, so thank you very much. If you or anyone you know is interested in local history or considers themselves an expert on local history, you could consider becoming a member of RHS, and you can do that right on our website, romehistoricalsociety.org. And if you go over to our Facebook page, facebook.com/romehistorical, you can learn more about our upcoming programs, and you can view all of our past programs as well. So getting into today's program, spring is here, which we're all very excited about, and our program is in honor of Earth Day. So we're joined by Betsy Ukeritis. She's an interregional environmental educator at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, or the DEC. So hi, Betsy. Thank you for being here with us. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at the DEC?
So I am the interregional educator. I do pretty much anything related to public outreach and education on anything environmental, because the DEC, or the Department of Environmental Conservation, is tasked with two main focuses: both environmental quality, the regulatory side of clean air, clean water, clean land, and solid waste, hazardous waste, spills, and we have the added focus of all things natural resources. So hunting and fishing rules and regulations and licenses and the enforcement of those, state forests, wildlife management areas, and the upkeep and study of those populations and tree species, invasive species, all the fun things of natural resources, but also environmental quality.
And so today we're doing a program called Green Living, Getting Back to Better, and we're taking a look at some historical practices that we can revisit to inspire us to live a little bit more sustainably. So I know I sent over some pictures from the RHS collection that's in your presentation, so I'll hand it over to you. You can start sharing your screen and take it away.
All right, let me make sure I share the correct one. And
that would be good.
Occasionally with sound, even though I don't need it. So we are looking at going green, learning from the past practices and adding to our knowledge. And we are looking at those past practices of, I've also been house hunting, so I've been going into some of the older houses to look at, and they still have milk doors. So it's been kind of fun researching a little bit of that history. But thinking back to when we had milk delivered in glass jars, we put those back outside for the milkman to come and collect, and they were sterilized and reused. Think about the amount of jugs, plastic and paper, coated paper that we use for milk now. So that's a lot of waste that we now create because we've lost that old practice of reusing, not even recycling, those old jars. Looking at reusing storage containers. My mom just sent me home with soup for Easter, and it was in a Cool Whip container. And we used to do that all the time. Now it's just buy more plastic Tupperware or throw, one-use disposable plastics. It is better when you get them from the restaurants and they're plastic or coated paper rather than the styrofoam. But thinking about how we have a tendency to just use saran wrap, Ziploc bags, use them once and throw them away. And that's leading to a lot of plastics that we find broken up into tiny particles called microplastics that are now in our ecosystems and in our food chain. We've been finding, there was a professor and her name always escapes me, but it was a female professor out of SUNY Fredonia who first discovered microplastics in the ecosystems, especially in the Great Lakes. And now she's done more research on Hudson River, the Mohawk Valley and the Mohawk River area, Lake Champlain, and she's since moved on to a Pennsylvania college, but she's still doing a lot of that microplastics research and seeing where it goes in the food chain. So anytime that we can reduce our plastic footprint is always a positive in my book. We used to use newspaper more routinely when we read it as a glass cleaner with a little bit of vinegar watered down. You spray that on your glass and you get no streak windows with newspaper, not the glossy kind, the black and white kind. So, those are tips that we used to do routinely. Think about how even when we were younger, we would walk to the store, the corner store. We would walk to the post office to pick up mail or ride our bicycles. Now we get in the car for, a 2-minute drive 4 times a day because we didn't think about putting all of those trips into one larger trip, kind of consolidating and planning ahead a little bit. Eating local was the only thing you could do because we weren't shipping food and fruits from all over the world. We were shipping some, but not as much as we are now. I have done a CSA, community supported agriculture for the last few years. And the vegetables and the fruit, because the one I live near is a big fruit farm, it tastes so much better because it's in the right season. It's grown in the correct season. It's not traveling for, 3 days on a truck or in a ship or an airplane to get to the grocery store. And even gardening, although most people all recognize that they should not ask me for gardening tips. I have 2 black thumbs. I don't even blame my mother anymore because she has killed Christmas cactuses, but I am not a plant person. So I recognize that shortcoming, but like Cornell Cooperative Extension has master gardening programs, and thinking about the victory gardens that they used to grow in the 40s, mainly because they didn't have, it helped supplement all of the food that they couldn't buy because they didn't have as much, but it also helped provide some of that extra food for soldiers in World War II. And then post World War II, they kept some of those going just as a support for as they came back. So we're going to look at making these green choices in and around the home, looking at meals, reusable versus throwaway, recycling and composting, and a little bit of transportation. And then I have a bunch of resources. The resources in this presentation are a little bit different than the resources on a handout that Miranda has for you guys as well. So there's a dual, I tried not to repeat all of the stuff. Mm-hmm. But in and around the home, looking at and thinking about repairs and replacements. There are a lot of places around, Buffalo has had some, Rochester has a few of them, and I believe Utica and Rome also has a few, but maker spaces and home repairs, they will actually have people on hand to do a little home repair things, like if your lamp isn't working correctly, you can bring them in and they can take a look at it and see how to fix it rather than replace it. But thinking about when your appliances, which are a little bit bigger for people to come and always repair, but making sure that when you buy new ones, getting a more energy efficient one, because it saves you money in the long run and it helps out with emissions and environmentally friendly aspects as well. So thinking about that Energy Star, that energy efficiency in the appliances that you may have to replace when they're fully broken. If you can repair, that's always a good thing. Looking at new types of light bulbs. We have moved from incandescent to compact fluorescent, and now a lot of people are moving to LED. I bought a new fan for the rental I have right now, and the lights in that are LED, and they are good for 40 years. They're also brighter than anything I have ever used. So I don't always turn that light on, but it gives a nice, you have it for 40 years, you're not going to have to replace them. It is a little more upfront on occasion, but 40 years of never replacing a bulb, getting on the ladder, it does have benefits. But looking at the energy efficiency of windows, in the past, when they weren't as energy efficient as you can buy and replace now, during the winter months, people would use a plastic coating over the windows to help block out that the drafts that would come through there. Now, my old apartment also had seriously drafty single pane windows. So I would tape them and put plastic over them, and that helped reduce heating bills because you're not losing your heat out to the cold air. So thinking about that weather stripping and insulating, think about it all the times when my grandmother was great at it. She would put a rolled towel under the door frame so that it would block the back porch because it wouldn't always shut correctly with that one seal. So she would put a rolled towel there, and it would help block that draft and keep her kitchen warmer. Thinking about using recycled or upcycled materials and sustainable materials wherever possible. Looking at your flooring, looking at your plastics and the woods, which one is better for your thinking about it. You can have people make concrete counters now with recycled things, or recycled paper counters. A friend of mine in Cape Cod, when they redid their little Cape Cod house, they used a recycled paper counter, which is super hard. It has a little bit of a coating on the top, and it looks great. But also taking a look at the low cost. You don't always have to add central air or add an extra AC in the window or in the wall when you just install ceiling fans and have that air circulating so that it stays cool for most of the time. Thinking about using those electronics and appliances at home. We all talk about Tide for cold water, and a lot of the Tides and a lot of the laundry detergents, if they're high efficiency, they can be used in any temperature water. So you can do most of your washing in cold water to help save that electricity to heat the water. Always do full loads whenever possible, because that can actually save you 3,400 gallons of water per year. Now, the one difference is that how many people realize that they shouldn't be hand washing dishes? Regardless of if it's a half load in the dishwasher or a full load in the dishwasher, you're only using about 4 gallons of water in most dishwashers right now. Whereas if you were hand washing that half load, you're probably using 40 gallons. So it is actually more efficient and more environmentally friendly to run your dishwasher rather than hand wash dishes, especially when you have that water running, because it just saves you more water. But also thinking about when you're running those appliances, dishwashers, clothes dryers, that take a lot of energy. Try doing them only in the morning or only in the later evening, because that's when the demand on the power grid is less. So you're actually using cleaner power at that point, and you're not pulling during the day. So many people are at work, they're doing all of this stuff. So it's actually better for the energy systems that we all have and the energy grid to run those bigger appliances early in the morning or later at night. Coming up to the electronics, we all have everything plugged in. So, I just lost power this afternoon, and it took 15 minutes to get the Wi-Fi back up and running so that I could actually do this program. But thinking about your laptops, your gaming machines, or just having your Spectrum box, it's always on. I can hear mine cycling through regardless of I'm just listening to the radio. So thinking about some of these electronics that you don't need to have on all the time, and using a power strip so that you can just turn the power strip off, and it's not like my presentation says right now, it helps slay energy vampires. That's just sucking electricity when it's not actually in use. Outside the home, thinking about environmentally friendly things like collecting rainwater. In the process of looking at houses, I've come across a few that have severe water damage because they don't have gutters and it's going all in one location. You can help with that by moving your gutters into a rain barrel. This is a homemade version from a trash can that you can then water your plants with. It's perfectly safe water. So this is one version. There are many different types. You can buy some, you can DIY some and upcycle some. But it helps make sure that, you're not destroying your foundation of your house, but it's also giving you more water to use, especially as we move into those drought situations with high fire damage or high fire probability, which we have right now in the eastern New York. You can also use a rain garden where you kind of funnel more of that water off your roof and in from the rain situations into a garden that is specifically designed with more water-loving plants. Lawn care especially, we just did a press release from the DEC. It is starting the Zero Phosphorus Fertilizers campaign again. It's an annual campaign to get people to think of zero phosphorus, because we're trying to reduce the amount of phosphorus that's going into our water systems. And take a look at more natural pesticides. Again, I am not a gardener. And if I did have a lawn, it would not be a regular lawn. It would be more native plants and easy to care for things. But taking a look at that integrated pest management tools, both your soil and water conservation district for your county and your Cornell Cooperative Extension Office in your county both have resources for the zero phosphorus fertilizers, natural pesticides, and integrated pest management, where you're looking at, if you have a aphid problem, you can bring in other why am I not remembering this name? Lady beetles to come in and eat it, so that it's more of a natural process rather than dumping more chemicals on. Speaking of landscaping, when you use more native species, there's less care for them to begin with because they are used to this content, this area, this habitat, this weather and climate. So you don't have to worry about them drying out too much. And because we just ended, but I never take my snow stuff out of my car until June 1st because we live in lake effect area. With this cold climate, if you're using a de-icer on your driveway and your stairs, make sure it has that combination of sand and salt so that you're using less of the chemical and it's helping both the environment and your pets' friendliness. Sand is much easier on your pets. The joys of everybody else except me growing your own food. This is a victory garden. It's one of Miranda's pictures from the Rome area. And even just growing little things nowadays, whether it's the herbs you use or a little bit of lettuce, there are window boxes, tower gardens that you can do even in an apartment setting if you had green thumbs, or at least a partial green thumb. So victory gardens weren't a huge swath of land to become a farm. They were smaller gardens on smaller properties that helped give access to food and help sustain people as they were rationing throughout. So you can, again, Cornell Cooperative Extension has the Master Gardeners program, and they have a ton of gardening resources. Something else to consider if you're going to move to a small plot of a garden is not only have your vegetables, but have certain flowers around it, because as those flowers bloom, they bring in more pollinators, and bees are not your only pollinator. There's bats, there's butterflies, even flies pollinate things. So as you have more of those bright, showy flowers, that brings in more pollination, and science actually proves that the flowers that you have ringing your food garden provide much more food produce grown because you have more pollinators coming to your actual garden. It's one of the few gardening facts that I know. So since we're talking about gardens and food, moving into meal times, I know that it's not safe right now to have programming and events, but when you do have, whether it's at the Rome Historical Society event or you're having a slightly larger family gathering, think about where you get your food from, and use local produce, the community supported agriculture. On the handout that I gave Miranda for everyone is New York State Ag and Markets, Department of Ag and Markets. They have farmers markets and community supported agricultural resources so that you can type in your city and it'll pop up where some of these more local markets are. The big thing is helping to reduce food waste. And that's really getting your family, the members of your groups to think about how much they're taking so that it's not wasted. You can come up for seconds. As we used to tell my nephew, you can have seconds, thirds, and fourths as long as you eat the first set that you ate or that you took. Some of our camps do a food waste weighing, where they try to see, as the camp goes from day 1 to day 5, how much food waste they actually reduce as the students and the campers have fun and realize that if they take less the first time and then go for a second, they'll actually reduce the amount of food that they're wasting, and they don't have to either compost, because some of the food you can't compost, or have things go thrown in the trash. A big thing is our throwaway culture of, use once utensils and done. Using the real plates and flatware and glassware and then washing them instead of just tossing them out. Because of COVID, we've seen an increase in all of these throwaways for safety, because they don't want to contaminate things. But think about as all of the waste that's happening because of that increase of use. And that we don't have unlimited trash space. So thinking about and being a little bit more conscious. I do carry a metal set of plasticware. I actually have it's like a spork. So on one end it's a spork, and the other end it has a little bit of a knife. So it's a spoon, fork all together. I have a plastic one, and I have one of those, because it's a combined tool, in pretty much every single bag that I own, just so that I can at least try to think about reducing the amount of single use that I have. I know that with COVID, you can't bring your mug into your local coffee shop anymore, but we'll get out of this COVID time. So thinking about having those and getting back into that habit. Composting food scraps and other compostable items for your garden. Think about having an extra container instead of just having, the returnable bottles container and the trash container. Have that third container for things that can be composted. And see if there is a community compost at a local park or a local garden, or a member's home that does a lot of composting. We've talked about community supported agricultural programs, or CSAs, and local farmers markets. The reduce food and compost, all can easily be done at home as well as where you are. This is another one of Miranda's photos, and it's Oneida County Fair in Rome, New York in 1927. And it's looking at all of the awesome vegetables and produce that was grown in this county. There is a website that we like to talk about called savethefood.com, and they have tips for reducing food waste, but they also, what's great is they have an interactive click through on how to keep food fresh. And it's like crazy, lots of different things. There's, how to keep dried beans fresh and how long they can last, how to keep bread fresh. Don't put it in the refrigerator. I'm notorious for that. But looking at this eating local, these are both pictures that Miranda sent. It's a local beekeeper hive and then a reenactment of a pantry, and thinking about how to dry stuff. If I could grow things like herbs, I could dry them in a pantry, and thinking about all of the different things that you can use. The other good thing with local honey is that it helps with your allergies because it has the pollens and it introduces them small at a time and it gives you that buildup. But thinking about how much it supports local and small businesses. That is a huge thing, especially during COVID and post-COVID, is getting them back, those small businesses and local producers, back on their feet. It does help with greenhouse gas emissions because you're not shipping it as far. You're actually picking it up from your area, your local area, and it's not international global shipping. The taste is usually better because it's fresher. I can't attest to tomatoes because I'm not a big tomato fan, but most of the time my friends and my identical twin tells me that the more local the tomato is, the better it tastes. Sometimes you can also just talk to the person who's growing your food and seeing where it comes from. What practices do they use? And just better understanding of where all of your food is coming from. And there is usually less waste. You don't have everything triple wrapped in plastic. So it does have that less waste. The discussion of throwaway versus reusable containers. This was created, this infographic was actually created by an environmental center in Colorado at the university. And it was created, this is probably still a few years old, definitely pre-COVID. So this was probably done in probably 2015. But if you take a look at, since 1997, the consumption of bottled water has increased more than tenfold, with the understanding that what is always in those bottles of water doesn't always have as much control or as much regulation as drinking water does. Just because it says it's spring water, that doesn't always mean that it's fully tested. So we do have that. You've had research that has shown that microplastics are actually in those bottles of water. And a lot of times you can actually drink more microplastics in your bottled water than you do in tap water. But if you drink Dasani and Aquafina, that's actually just, you're paying double for your tap water. It is usually tap water and municipal water pulled out, and then has a reverse osmosis system. But they are literally taking your own drinking water and bottling it and selling it back to you. Having that filter, we have a zero water filter. I've used Brita, I've used Pure. They help dramatically, as you can see on this infographic, that 53 billion gallons of water in bottled water is globally drank. That's so much. It's not only that it's all drank, some of it is wasted. So for 12 ounces of water bottled, 36 ounces of everything is consumed. 40% of your bottled water comes from a tap, and it does not have to adhere to government standards for clean water. 17 million barrels of oil are used to produce those bottled water containers. That's 340 million gallons of gasoline, and only 1 in 5 of those bottles are recycled. The other 4 contribute to over 3 billion pounds of plastic waste each year. And you're hopeful that it gets into the landfill, but a lot of times it doesn't. You do want to use that reusable water bottle, but also take a look at the material that you're using. I have double-walled stainless. They can get heavy if you have much larger containers. So I do also have a glass one for smaller jaunts out into the environment, and I do have a wrap around it for a little bit of protection. Because let's face it, when you're hiking, I still use my metal ones so that if I throw my backpack around, I'm not shattering glass in my backpack. And you do want to make sure, especially nowadays, that it's PBA-free plastic. And most of them are at this point. It's been a few years since the PBA plastic issues. But you still want to make sure that they are that PBA plastic if you're going for a shatterproof plastic. But it all brings into this whole convenience versus thinking about the environment. Yes, it is more convenient to just grab that coffee in a paper cup, or hopefully not a styrofoam cup, and go. But as we're moving out of COVID, hopefully more of the places are going to start bringing back those discounts if you brought your own mug. We used to be great in bringing our own canvas bags, or even in my youth, it was paper, no plastic, and we would reuse those paper bags into covers for your textbooks. And then you could draw on them, and every week you'd change it up because you just finished doodling on them. So making sure that you're remembering your plastic bags. We do have a plastic bag ban in the state of New York. There's still issues. They're still working on a rewrite. So thinking about canvas bags, when I was in Romania in 2000, it was one of their biggest complaints is that they didn't have the resources to give customers their own plastic bag when they came into the store and bought stuff. And a bunch of us Americans were like, but that's a good thing. You're a steps ahead of us because you don't have that plastic waste being thrown around and usually blown into trees. They would always carry their pungas, their small bags, to the store and just fill those up with it. And, back in 2000, 21 years ago, that was light years ahead of what we were thinking of. Anything that you're purchasing, try and look for the recycled content, especially if they have the words on there, post-consumer waste. There's a lot of waste in the manufacturing process. So even though it says recycled content, it's not always post-consumer. A lot of times it is post-manufacturing process, pre-consumer. The better recycled content is the post-consumer waste, so it's actually taking trash out of the landfills. But also just considering if you're looking at two identical products, look at their packaging and see which one's more environmentally friendly. And, to the extent we still do this, but clothing was handed down to younger siblings and cousins, or it was torn when it was too old, it was torn and turned into cleaning rags. You didn't have to go out and buy a bunch of cleaning rags. You just had your old clothes that you could tear up. There has been a resurgence of looking at places like ThredUp or consignment shops and secondhand shops and Goodwill stores and purchasing in those, which is great to see. because it's so much easier to buy used and lightly used and then wash it and then you get to enjoy it. Because I know I'd prefer paying, $10 for something rather than $100. So it's always nice to see that is starting to increase again. And then we talked about using those other containers as storage containers, so they're not a one use, that you can use them more often. Even my father, I was laughing at one of the basements of the houses that I was looking at because it was an entire shelving unit of tiny jelly jars, peanut butter jars, all these different types of jars, and it had nuts, screws, bolts, nails, all kinds of different things sorted into those little containers. So it's reusing those things. Because just because we have the ability to recycle doesn't mean that recycling is always the best. Reducing our footprint, reusing items, and then recycling is the better movement through the 3 R's. I talked a little bit about how in the past soda, juice, and milk came in glass and they were returned, sterilized, and used again. One of the things that can help with that nowadays is soda streams. You are, using the same bottles over and over again. You're creating less waste. You get to flavor it as what you want. And it makes pretty good seltzer too, for those who just need the bubbles and a little bit of flavor. And think about all of the soda bottles that you can save. So looking at recycling and composting, in the recycling, we have changed over the years. The rechargeable batteries, because they have some harmful chemicals and hazardous waste in them, you can only recycle that. You can only recycle them at electronic stores, or there's a number of stores, including Target and Walmart and Best Buy, but you can't just throw those out. Same thing with alkaline regular batteries. You can throw out 1 or 2 or a handful of them, but as soon as you start compiling them into bigger containers, it becomes a hazardous waste situation, and you actually have to put it in a hazardous waste facility treatment rather than just throwing a couple out at a time. All of your old TVs and monitors, the bigger ones, not the flat screens, they can't just get thrown in your trash. You have to go to an e-cycling or electronics recycling event. Sometimes if they're still in working order, they'll be taken back by Target or mostly by Best Buy, or full on electronic stores. The cathode ray tubes in them is a hazardous waste. And there is starting to be better end of life recycling. It's a life cycle of a product thought process for companies now. Europe has had this for years, where if you create something in Europe, you have to take it back at the end of its life. So even though, you've had I'm going to pick on Samsung DVD player, and you one location sold it, they have to be able to collect it and take it back at the end of its life. We're slowly moving to some of that thought process, and Best Buy does accept some other electronics like printers, but you have to check with them, and that was again pre-COVID. So you can take a look at other things that the store would recycle. Composting. There are a lot of composting tips, tricks on the DEC webpage. This easy home composting picture is actually a PDF on our website, and it talks about what you need to make a good backyard composting. Clearly, this is not a good one for apartment life because I don't have that space on my balcony, but it talks about greens and browns, fresh air that has to move through. It needs to get a little bit warm. So that the insects and the breakdown decomposition happens. You don't want to put meat or dairy or very oily things in it because it will attract more more pest species than you want, and it won't always break down as easily or as nicely. And then you have the finished compost pile, which is great for adding to gardens if you grow. We have made progress in recycling. Again, this is a little bit old. This is from 2012. We have been making that recycling, composting, and disposal of MSW as municipal solid waste. So we have helped to increase that. We've started to recycle more from compared to 1980 to 1912. We've looked at how we haven't started putting yard trimmings into the trash. We've put it in recycling, or we put it in composting. Sometimes your municipality will actually take a lot of the leaf and yard trimmings and have a composting site for that. So it's good to see that these are changing, but we need to keep that momentum going. Speaking of moving, going back to that, making sure that you're bundling the short trips together for efficiency and less waste of gas, walking or riding a bike whenever possible. It actually has been mental health. It gets brought into this using your bike or taking a walk, so that it helps your whole mental health and outlook. Getting outside for that 15 to 20 minutes has been an incredible lifesaver in the COVID times. So, you know, take that walk, ride a bike, go to the grocery store or the corner store for that. I used to live in New York City for 10.5 years, so public transportation was so easy there. When I moved up to Syracuse, not so much. So if you can, but I also recognize that we have moved so far away from public transportation, especially in suburban and rural communities. Some of our cities are better than others. So if there's a possibility, but the bigger thing is making sure that you're bundling those trips together so that it's not 14 trips out to the store if possible. Mm-hmm. I do have some resources. So NYSERDA does have energy saving tips for residents and homeowners. There is also a rental energy tips page on energy efficiency. With New York has a whole Green NY. They have lunchtime seminars, they have tips, they have web pages on this. So there is green lawn care, reducing waste, energy efficiency, transportation, and reducing greenhouse gas. Those are the web pages, but there are also reducing single-use plastics tip sheets and your green home tips sheet that are PDFs that you can download and easily print or just read. And then the Save the Foods interactive storage guide for saving food is on this resource list as well. And my contact information is up here, but two things I want to mention before we wrap up is DEC does have a Green Living newsletter. It comes out monthly, and that is a link to the April 2021 issue, and it has some of the reducing or using less harsh chemicals while cleaning. A lot of what I had put on the PDF handout that Miranda has is in this current newsletter for April, getting ready for Earth Day. And then Rhinestone Woods is an environmental ed center outside of Buffalo, but their center director, Megan Boyce Green, is also offering a sustainability lunch talks in May, and they're weekly, I believe. Don't quote me on that. And you can sign up for those. You can sign up for the whole month series or just one or two of them. And it's more of a dialogue and a conversation. So they have those going on in May. Their April ones are full up already, but they're repeating all of the sessions again in May. So Miranda, any questions or before we wrap up?
I just want to say thank you for going through all of this. I've learned a lot, and I think it's important to you know, when you think back to our ancestors and what they did historically, there's a lot we can learn from them. So, you know, hearing about it and learning about it, or just having conversations about it is something that's very useful. So thank you. Yeah, that's all. I just want to say thank you to all of our viewers for joining us today, and I hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to post the links, some of the links you talked about, and the handout that you gave us right here with our program, so people can. All right. Thank you, everybody. Bye, Betsy.
Bye.